Every question of the offseason is going to wrap itself around the central one, which is what happens with Kirk Cousins. Let's talk about the options on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that? 3, 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to the show every single day. Heard from a lot of you today, and I really appreciate it. Thank you all very much. If you're new to this show, you can find the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is an audio listening place like the SiriusXM app. You can also just search out whatever team, and you can find hometown broadcasts. You can find hometown broadcasts of Wolves games or Wild games or Twins games when they come around, Vikings games during the season as well. You can also find the show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off of your order. That's JASE medical.com. Today on the show, let's just go right into the elephant in the room. What happens with this Kirk dude? On, I think it was Tuesday, the Vikings cleaned out all their lockers and kind of had their final day, signed each other's helmets, very last day of school. And that locker cleanout day is also an open media day. So a lot of reporters asked a lot of questions of a lot of people, and we got a lot of interesting insights into where certain players' heads are at. And those full interviews were also captured and published to the internet so that people who were not there can also see them. And I think that is really important when it comes to players who we aren't really sure where their head is at, like Kirk Cousins or Danielle Hunter or Justin Jefferson. How upset are they? How much do they want to be a Viking? Where do they want to resign? For how much? What's it going to, what kind of leverage do they feel like they have? How willing are they to go to free agency? A lot of those questions are emotional, as much as they are business, or they can be. And I think it's important to, if you're going to try to read the emotions of a person, try your best not to fall victim to a quote, because when you are reading just a quote, you're reading, in a sense, the opinion of the person who spliced it, because they chose what quote to publish. And ultimately, even if they're really trying hard not to, which I think journalists should, you will still be subject to the choices of the narrator. There's no way for narrators not to make a choice about that, right? It's physically impossible. So, plus you can't get inflection in tone when you're just reading a quote online. So be careful, I guess. Media literacy. It's a good skill. The main topic, though, is Kirk Cousins, and then I do want to get into Danielle Hunter and Justin Jefferson as well, but Kirk Cousins was pretty candid about his season and trying to get back to it. He didn't seem very interested in selling himself in kind of the way of I don't think I should have to, which at the age of 36, people should kind of know. They either like you or you don't, or they don't, right? There's not a lot of debate to be had anymore. People have seen plenty to be able to come up with their opinions on Kirk Cousins. As for the Achilles injury, he said that's on track to heal. He does not think that's going to be an issue. Obviously, that's not really something that you can predict. So we can, wish it into existence all we want, but I don't think that's a selling point that you can really hang your hat on if you're Kirk Cousins. You can't promise that. But, hey, I've won this many games. I've been in the playoffs. I've been a starting franchise quarterback for almost a decade. I mean, arguably a decade, depending on when you think his start as the de facto starter in Washington happened and when they actually decided to give up on RG3 or whatever. Very pedantic, interesting conversation for a podcast that isn't this one. I get it, right? His resume speaks for itself. And whatever it says to you is on you, and that's not what I'm going to talk about today. But it seemed like he had some peace with it, right? He said, I'm going to let Mike McCartney, who's his agent, do the talking, and I'll let him handle it. I'll let the team handle it. And I'm just going to, be right with the Lord and follow God's path, right? Which is very Kirk Cousins way to put it. So my understanding of where Kirk Cousins wants to be is that Kirk wants to stay in Minnesota if possible, but understands that it's a business, and that whatever he thinks he is worth, I think has a respectful understanding that the Vikings might not want that. Now, allow me to recount the story for you. This was what Ben Gessling reported around this time last year. It was during camp. It was the summer. The Vikings and Kirk Cousins went to the table and tried to get an extension done. They wanted to keep Kirk Cousins in the building for longer. Kirk Cousins wanted it. They tried to figure out the money, but they reached an impasse. That impasse was about guarantees in 2025. They were fine with fully guaranteeing 2023. They were fine with fully guaranteeing 2024, especially because this was after the draft. So they knew that whoever is the succession plan, best case, will be a rookie next year. And they'd be perfectly happy to have Kirk Cousins there. And that way you don't have to start the rookie right away, right? It's good practice. Everybody agrees on that for the most part. But they reached an impasse when it came to guaranteeing 2025, which again tells me that the Vikings want to have, or Kwesi, at least at that moment, wanted to have moved on. He wanted to have gotten into the youngster by 2020. He wants a new quarterback starting by 2025. That's the message that sent to me. Things change over time, right? Minds change, and circumstances change. But the idea of a 1-year deal for Kirk Cousins seems like something that the Vikings have no new reason to suddenly not be into, right? But they also, I don't think they have a new reason to suddenly be into a 2025 thing. And there's one sentiment that has bugged me, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but for people who are new or just didn't catch it, the 9-game stretch of backup quarterback play that we'll generously call spotty, we'll use that word to be nice, isn't necessarily a leverage point in Kirk Cousins' favor as much as it is a leverage point in any other quarterback's favor. And there is this bad faith thing that people will do that I see a lot of people who have turned their personality into Kirk Cousins defending, or at least online. It's the only thing that I'll see from certain people. And I'm not just talking about Twitter. I'm talking about people who write articles. And I'll see this sometimes and just think to myself, you don't have to work that hard. I'm talking about articles that I've seen, people put effort into content that I feel it's interesting to respond to. And one thing that that contingent of the Viking world will do is say stuff like, wow, look how bad the Vikings were without Kirk Cousins. They sure need him now. Kirk Cousins can go, point to those 4 interception games and say, this is why you have to give me all the money in the world. And what are the Vikings going to do now? He's got him over a barrel. Or some people will say that, but as a bad thing, and then say, woe is me, the Vikings have, or Kirk Cousins, who I hate, has the Vikings over a barrel. Whichever perspective it comes from, I think it's pretty wrong. The Vikings learned a pretty valuable lesson in that 3-6 stretch without Kirk Cousins, and it's that having a competent quarterback is important. There are more competent quarterbacks available in the offseason than Kirk Cousins. And again, we can go over every single option if you want to. I might even do that before the end of the week. Doesn't sound like the Vikings or the Cardinals are going to trade away Kyler Murray, which makes them actually a really good trade-up candidate. They've picked 4th. The Vikings could be negotiating with them on or before draft day. Could be interesting. But that's just a report, a rumor, right? Maybe that's still worth at least discussing the merits of if that would be a good idea, just so that you kind of have a reference point in the quarterback landscape. But somebody like Russell Wilson is available. I'm not a huge fan of that, but people have suggested it. Again, something that's worth at least going through the paces and trying to, write down why you don't like it, just so that you have that down. There are interesting backup ideas available, although I don't think the Vikings will be in the backup quarterback market very much because Nick Mullins is still under contract and they still have Jaron Hall under contract. So they still kind of have the depth of that room is there. And maybe they want to try to improve on it or something like that. But that'll be a low priority. And then you have all these quarterbacks in the draft. I am currently working on a series that will cover 6 of the quarterbacks that I've seen talked about as first-round quarterbacks. 6 in the first round, I think, would be a record. Like that probably won't happen, but some of those guys will. Like, there's 6 people who have been suggested at this, at least. Any one of those guys, right, could be your competent, serious quarterback. The option that 3 and 6 stretch showed you that we cannot do is roll into the 2024 season with Nick Mullins at the helm. And I have a feeling that that's not the option. I have a sneaking suspicion that that's not on the bulleted list of everyone's favorite options. And it wasn't to begin with either. So I don't think we learned anything you didn't already know if you have watched a little bit of football before. Quarterbacks are important. Congratulations. But the real sticking point here is going to be guarantees in 2025. Will Kwesi want to commit to 2 more years of Kirk Cousins? Will he want to put off the development of a youngster 2 more years and say, let's not start that clock yet? Or will Kirk Cousins say, look, I know that before the 2023 season, I wanted these, at this extra year of guarantees, but now I understand that I got hurt and there's an Achilles and that I'm getting older. I'll be fine with 1 year, and then a deal gets done. That's how I think it has to go down. Somebody's got to blink there, and maybe the circumstances have made it such, but all we can do is wait and see. I still want to talk about where Justin Jefferson is at and the psychoanalysis that he is subjected to, and same deal with Danielle Hunter as well. So that'll all come up. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Jase Medical, and in particular, their Jase Case, which is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinus infections, skin infections, and all kinds of other stuff. Things that are pretty common, that happen to everybody, and it's important to be prepared, especially if you live in a place where medications, antibiotics for that kind of thing aren't necessarily readily available. If you live out in a rural place, or, there's supply chain issues and stuff all the time, so sometimes it can be difficult to get those prescriptions filled. It's just good to have your own personal stash of those medications on hand so you can deal with a problem when it comes up and have full control of your situation. I don't know about you, but for me, one of the most frustrating things in the world, that's why I'm glad I do a solo podcast, is not having control over my own destiny, right? Not having control over my own problems. If I mess up, I mess up, but at least I am the one who is in control of those things, and that's really important, which is why I love what Jase does. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off of your order. That's locked on, all one word, at jasemedical.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks. It's daily fantasy made easy. It's been my favorite way to have a little bit of fun on the side while watching NFL games that I otherwise have no stake in. PrizePicks isn't daily fantasy the way that you may be familiar with it. It is not a full lineup, and you're not entering a pool and competing against other players. You are competing against the house itself. Pick 2 to 6 of your favorite players, and if you get them all right, versus whatever the house's projection is, you just have to pick more than or less than, you can win up to 25 times your money. And you can get all kinds of really fun combos. For example, Christian McCaffrey, more than 75 rushing yards, or Patrick Mahomes, more than 2 passing touchdowns. And you can combine all of those things together. You can even go pull in combinations from hockey or basketball. Go get your, Wemby stats. Does he do stats, or is he just a defense guy? I don't really know basketball. But you can, if you do, you can go to PrizePicks and have a little bit of fun with it. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Onward and upward with this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. For your second listen, go check out the 24/7 live stream of Locked On Minnesota sports content. That is Vikings, Wolves, Wild. You got to go listen to Locked On Wolves, right? But just flick that thing on. It's on the Locked On Minnesota Sports YouTube page. Flick that thing on and just forget about it. Just let it be your background thing while you work, or whatever you prefer to do with it. Moving on, Justin Jefferson also spoke with the media recently, and every time Justin Jefferson goes up in the media, somebody will ask him, hey, what do you think about the quarterback situation? What do you think about signing a contract and all that? Brad Spielberger, who does the PFF contracts guy, he's a guy I'm going to be citing a lot in the next month or two because I like his contract projections. I think he's the best in the biz at it. And he was talking about the 2021 draft class and that they, come March 13th or whatever the new league year is, will be eligible for an extension. So if the Vikings wanted to extend Christian Darrisaw on March 20th, they will finally be allowed to do that. They can't do it today, but they can do it in March. It is fairly rare for non-quarterbacks to get extended that first year, like what the Vikings tried to do with Justin Jefferson. And it makes sense that they would try to do that with Justin Jefferson because JJ is not your ordinary wide receiver, right? He's pretty special. So I think the special treatment is warranted there. But it's not that abnormal for it to take an extra year. Now, it's kind of a bummer that they didn't get there. But I think this was Gessling. And if I miscited that, I'm very, very sorry. But I think he was the one with the scoop who said that the last offer of Justin Jefferson's extension in camp was from Jefferson's camp, was from Jefferson's side of things. I think that's a really important detail because it shows you who is motivated, right? Who's asking who for what. And my understanding of these negotiations is that it is a back and forth. The Vikings will put forth an offer. The Jefferson camp will put forth a counter offer and so on and so forth. And the clock ran out with this on Kwesi's desk, not on Justin Jefferson's agent's desk. So I think we all get a little bit in our heads. And if I may soapbox a little bit, we get a little bit all wideouts are the same. I won't accuse anything further of that. But I think whenever I go back and forth with somebody on this, either in online discussions or even in real life discussions, whenever I kind of challenge, well, why do you think that Justin Jefferson is just going to demand out and leave? Because there's really no evidence of that so far. We've seen him be frustrated. A lot of people really freaked out about him being frustrated on the sideline in the Lions game after a drive fell apart. And if you look at that clip, and somebody will have tweeted a video of that clip, right? And if you go to Twitter and you look at that clip and you read the replies to that clip, everybody is just saying, oh, wow, he's gone. Oh, well, cool, he's a Bengal. Everybody's just assuming that he's gone. And some of that's, the emotion of the moment, right? We got to give people space to do that, to deal with that. But I think there is some real sentiment that people are afraid. And I see it in my own YouTube comments and in my Twitter Tuesdays and all that stuff. People are afraid that Justin Jefferson will eventually get as fed up with the Vikings as Vikings fans are, and decide that he doesn't want to be a part of this anymore. And there might be some wishful projection in that. He can leave. We can't. He can go to some team that will hurt him less. We can't do that. We just have to sit there and get hurt every year. I don't know. Maybe I'm out of line saying that, so I apologize. But I have not seen anything from Justin Jefferson that tells me that isn't to be expected of a competitor, right? He gets frustrated when they are losing. I don't think he's ever been frustrated with them ahead on the scoreboard. He gets frustrated when they're losing because he doesn't want to lose. He wants to win. He wants to win and he wants to ball out. And every time he is asked, what do you think about Kirk Cousins being the quarterback of the future? What do you think about getting a rookie? What do you think about this or that? Does it affect the contract? His answers have been remarkably consistent, and that's the media training. He will fall on the old line. I'll let my agent handle that. I don't care. I'm just here to play football, right? That's great. He says, I want to be here. I want to be a part of the organization. I love all my teammates, and I want to say all the right things. And when asked about the quarterback, going all the way back, and I was in a little bit of rabbit hole looking at the summer of 2021 for a totally different reason today, and stumbled across a Justin Jefferson interview about, if you remember, in 2021, the Vikings almost took Justin Fields. They tried to trade up to pick 8, 9, 10, And the rumor was that they were either going to take Fields there or Rashawn Slater. And the organization was split on Justin Fields. Some liked him, some didn't. And so they ended up not really having the gumption and then get leapfrogged by the Bears. And somebody asked Justin Jefferson about that and about the idea that, they had called Kirk Cousins, the Vikings had, Spielman, and said, we're going to be thinking about drafting a quarterback in 2021. And, we're not asking permission. We're not telling you, that you're on the outs or anything like that. We just want you to hear it from us. And that seemed to go over fine. And they tried to. And all of this came out after the draft. And somebody was asking Justin Jefferson about it. I think it was Colin Cowherd was asking Justin Jefferson about it. And he went, hey, I love Kirk. You got to think about the future. Whoever's throwing to me, I'm good to go. All I do is catch footballs. Like, that was his quote, right? And everybody went crazy about it. Because, he hates Kirk Cousins. He hates playing with Kirk Cousins because he's looking at the future. And it's like, actually, I think he just is saying he doesn't care who is throwing to him. And I think the sentiment is the same in the locker room clean out, on Monday or Tuesday or whenever that happened. It's, I love Kirk, but I understand it's a business and whoever's throwing to me, I'm here to ball. Like, that's all he's saying. I don't think he cares who the quarterback is. Like, I think he wants to win, right? He wants the best decision to be made, and he's deferring that to the front office whose job it is. That's what it seems like to me. And maybe you can say, well, that's just media platitudes, and he really actually thinks this, but I challenge you to find more concrete evidence than quotes. And considering that he's been so remarkably consistent about that over years, I kind of believe him. So I don't think you have to worry about it. I think everybody can just chill out a little bit about Justin Jefferson. That's all I'm trying to get you to do is relax. All right. He's not Stephon Diggs. That's worsist. That's wide receiver assist. They're not all the same. All right. It's a totally different dude. So please leave your Stephon Diggs PTSD in the trash. It's been 5 years now. It's time to move on. There's also the Danielle Hunter of it all, who I think the reporting surrounding him has also created this weird air that is worth discussing. So we'll get into that next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by BetterHelp, online therapy made easy. Taking care of your mental health is important. Even if you aren't somebody that feels like they're going through anything that makes you need to go see the brain doctor, that's not really what therapy is. For me, it's maintenance. It's keeping things on the up and up, and therapy with regularity has been really important for me in my life. So I strongly recommend you try it out. And BetterHelp can help you get started because they can help get you set up with a therapist that they think is right for you. And if you don't like that therapist, they'll help you cycle through different consults and try people on for size until you get somebody that really jives with you. And I think that's a really important thing to lowering that barrier of entry to getting into therapy. Have one bad experience, don't assume that that's what all therapy is like, because it's not. It gets really different from person to person to person. So try a whole bunch on until you get somebody that works for you. It's better. That's what BetterHelp can help you with. So visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Last thing that I want to get to here on this episode of Locked On Vikings podcast, which is turning out more psychoanalytical than I guess I anticipated, but here we are. I think we kind of need to have that talk because the way that we talk about Danielle Hunter, I think, is also a little bit crazy. So I have no idea what's going to happen with Danielle Hunter. Like with Justin Jefferson, honestly, if he doesn't get an extension, for one, the time when he leaves the Vikings is 2 years away. Like that is when he actually gets any say in this, unless the Vikings decide to trade him away. But he will play on his 5th-year option next year if he doesn't sign an extension, and then they can tag him. So they still have 2 years of team control. Not the case with Danielle Hunter. Danielle Hunter becomes a free agent at the same time Kirk Cousins does. But a lot of the hesitation around Danielle Hunter over the last 3 years has been with health, right? He had that neck thing, and then he tore his pec. He actually talked about how emotional it was to come back from that torn pec and how he wasn't sure if he would ever play again. And how difficult it was for him to come back for that. He has been a top 10 player in pressures when actually healthy for the last 4 healthy seasons that he's had. And now he's had 2 healthy seasons in a row. He's played 2 full seasons in a row, 22 and 23. So those injury issues are as in the past as they will ever get. And the risk that Danielle Hunter represents is like pretty minimalized. With those neck injuries, there's always some, but I don't think it's enough anymore to affect the contract. So whether Danielle Hunter hits the market or he signs with the Vikings, dude's getting money. I think for the Vikings, they are not in a position to let Danielle Hunter walk. That's my personal opinion. I don't think they can afford to do that. You say that because of the cap, they can't afford to sign certain players. I say because of the roster, they can't afford to lose certain players. And Danielle Hunter is one of those players. If they lose Danielle Hunter, they probably need to acquire they do have to acquire 3 serious defensive ends, rosterable defensive ends, 2 of whom need to be starting caliber. And that's just to have like a normal rotation. And you've got to hit on 3 guys in one offseason at the same position. That's pretty hard to do. That if Danielle Hunter walks, it will be a bad edge group. Like there's no way to not have it be a bad edge group unless you just like Yahtzee this. But it's hard to Yahtzee this, right? We just saw it at cornerback. I got one good player, and when he went out, the secondary fell apart. And by the way, that happened in 2019, and the Vikings are still recovering. Or in the 2020 offseason, that happened to the Vikings cornerback room, and they are still recovering because they didn't Yahtzee. They like missed on a couple draft picks, and now it's like all completely a disaster still, right? So when all the light bulbs go out at once like this, it means the position group is going to struggle for a while unless you hit Yahtzee. So I think Danielle Hunter can get whatever he needs from the Vikings, and I don't think that it's reasonable to let him walk. But he also has to want to play for the Vikings. Right now, he in the locker room again, he was talking to Darren Wolfson, and he said, "No, I want to be here, but I understand it's a business." That was what he said, right? Again, it's the right thing to say. But I think with him, and to a degree, this applies to Kirk Cousins as well. There is no reason that Danielle Hunter needs to say the media platitudes about the Vikings anymore. He doesn't need to say, "I love this organization." Like, he doesn't need to volunteer that. Like, if he's directly asked, he'll probably say something banal, but he doesn't need to volunteer that out of nowhere, and he did. So I do believe him here. I do believe that him playing in the same team that he has played for his entire career is something that he would be interested in having a conversation about, right? And if you don't believe me, look at other situations around the league. Saquon Barkley, for example. He is also a pending free agent. He was franchise tagged. The Giants could tag him again, or they could not tag him again. When he was asked about this, he said, "Do what you're going to do, but make it quick because I want to know." Right? That's a way different tone, isn't it? Like, that's the kind of thing you hear from players who are ready to leave, who are ready to get out of that organization. Like, sign me or don't, or tag me or do whatever. I'm done with this. Please stop making, like, he that's a frustrated person with Danielle Hunter. And again, watch the interview and his demeanor. He's very at peace, right? It's very, somebody, or one of the questions was like, are you looking forward to the control? You can choose your own destination in free agency. And you just kind of, his immediate, like, visceral reaction was a shrug. Kind of, eh. And then he said something a little bit better, for his prospects and stuff. But ultimately, I think with all 3 of these situations, all 3 of these players would sign back with the Vikings if you needed them to. Money is, of course, the thing, right? They're not all going to sign back for $1. You got to pay them right. But in terms of do they or don't they want out of the organization, there's not really any reason to believe that any of them want out of the organization. And should any or all of these 3 players eventually exit the Minnesota Vikings, it's because the Minnesota Vikings chose that. That's the way I see this going down. And when the tell-all books get written in 15 years, we'll have a better sense for what exactly went down with Danielle Hunter and the way that things have been reported around him for years about him, being very angry about his contract and the hold-in and all of that stuff. This from the outside view, this thing that seems very contentious, right? And you see Danielle Hunter holding in and then only getting a 1-year deal, and you go, that dude's absolutely gone. I don't think he has to be. And I think if he is, it's because the Vikings decided that they were going to be okay without him. And if they do choose that, and then they are not okay without him, we get to hold that against them. We get to levy that as a criticism. And so just make a note, put a pin in it, and we'll see how all of this stuff plays out. But it doesn't seem like there's any interpersonal conflicts here. It's all business. It's all about money. And even though Kirk Cousins in his locker room interview said, it's not really about it's not about the dollars. It's what the dollars represent, which I think is, to me, that sounds like he's looking for commitment. And that's just because I know Kirk Cousins. Like we've been watching him for 6 years now. We know him very well. And we know how much commitment and security and predictability matters to him, right? Stability matters to him a lot. And I think that's what dollars represent, right? The idea of, we're going to sign you to a contract that will hit a $45 million cap hit in its last year. And we can't cut that because we'll fully guarantee it. That is security, right? That's stability. And Kirk Cousins is going to like that, even though that money is all base salary and it's going to get restructured and it's going to get, there's all kinds of ways that it's going to get messed with, and it can be traded and stuff. There is something to look at this contract structure. We can't cut you because of it. That was appealing to him back in the Rick Spielman contract days, right? And even with the Kwesi contract that he signed when Kwesi first, it was like the first thing Kwesi did when he got hired. That matters to Kirk Cousins. And I think when he says that's what the dollars represent, I think that's what he's talking about. So I think it's going to come down to guarantees. I think it could come down to guarantees with the other two guys as well. But again, Vikings got to want to do it. We will figure out what's going to go on tomorrow. I might even get into a little bit of draft stuff, but we still have some contract things to talk about and a lot of off-season stuff to go over. So the work does not end. Hope you all enjoy your Wednesday. And as always, Skol.